Good day, everyone. We are the group two, and today we are going to discuss the security policies and procedures in relation to the information assurance and security. But before we discuss the topics, allow me to introduce the group members. I am Jamaica Kunanan. Together with me is Cyril Ho Kabahit, Jesse Flores, and Admiel Navaras. The documented rules and step by step instructions that tell an organization's people what to do and how to do it to protect information assets. This is one of the four pillars our class is conveying. Alongside organizational rules, standards, and compliance, and governance risk management. And it's fitting that we start here because almost every other control in an organization traces back to a written policy somewhere. A useful way to remember the distinction is this: policies describe the why and the what, the organization's intent and direction, while procedures describe the how, the specific actions employees must take to meet that intent. Both are required and neither works well without the other. Think of a policy as a law passed by a legislature and a procedure as the implementing regulation that tells an agency exactly how to enforce that law day by day. Over the next few minutes, we will walk through these documents, actually contain why organizations invest real time and money into writing and maintaining them, how a policy program is typically built and kept alive, and some of the common pitfalls organizations run into. We'll close with a short discussion prompt before handing it back to the class. So let's start. What are security policies and procedures? A security policy is a high level statement approved by a senior management that defines an organization's approach to protecting its information, covering the confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of data, often shortened to the CIA triad. Policies set expectations. Procedures translate those expectations into concrete, repeatable actions such as password creation steps, incident reporting workflows, account provisioning checklists, or data retention schedules. According to guidelines built around ISO IEC 27001, the leading international standard for information security management systems, or ISMS, policies are meant to be practical and usable rather than long and bureaucratic. Industry analysis of the standard notes that policies establish an organization's strategic security direction, while procedures supply the granular instructions needed to carry that direction out. In other words, a policy might say access to sensitive systems must be limited to authorized personnel, while the accompanying procedures spells out exactly how an employee requests access, what proves it, and how that access is revoked when someone changes roles or leaves the company. It's also worth noting that ISO does not require one giant, all encompassing policy document. Most organizations today use a modular set of individual policies: an access control policy, a data classification policy, an acceptable use policy, an incident response policy, and so on. Each with this its own scope, its own designated owner. This modularity is itself a design decision meant to make the documents easier to write, easier to update, and easier to audit. Why they matter. Without a written policy, employees have no formal basis for knowing what is expected of them. And organizations have little resource when something goes wrong. Analysts studying ISO and Annex A 5.1 point out that policies must be clearly communicated through channels such as intranets, email, workshops, or employee handbooks. Because unwritten common sense is not a defensible standard once an incident occurs. If an employee is disciplined for a security violation, HR generally needs a documented policy that was actually communicated to that employee. Otherwise, the organization has a very little standing to act. Policies and procedures also give organizations something to show auditors, regulators, clients, and partners. Um, Documented and auditable evidence that security is managed deliberately rather than left to chance. In many industries, a prospective client or partner will ask to review an organization's security policy or ask for a certification like ISO 27001 that depends on those policies. But before signing a contract, in that sense, policies aren't just an internal management tool. They are part of how the organization proves its trustworthiness to the outside world. Beyond audits and contracts, policies function as a kind of institutional memory. Employees come and go, but a well maintained policy library preserves the organization's accumulated judgment about how to handle risk so that the newly hires don't have to relearn lessons the hard way. Uh, Such as establish accountability, who must to do what, and what happens if they don't, and provide a consistent baseline across departments, sites, and vendors. Serves as audit evidence for certifications such as ISO 27001 or SOC2 and PCI DSS. This will reduce risk by turning abstract security goals into daily repeatable habits. And also, it will preserve institutional knowledge that would otherwise leave with departing staff. So, how organizations build and maintain them? Effective policy programs follows a life cycle. Draft, get senior management approval, communicate to staff, train employees, and review on a fixed schedule, commonly every 6 or 12 months, to keep pace with new risks and regulatory changes. Rather than one massive document, most organizations now use a modular, topic specific set of policies, which makes ownership and auditing easier since each policy can be assigned to the manager best positioned to keep it current. A 2025 industry report on information security practice found that structured training methods, particularly learning management platforms, were the most effective way organizations build staff awareness of these policies, reinforcing that a policy which is filed away and never taught has little practical value. This matters because a policy's real effectiveness isn't measured by how well it's written. It's measured by whether employees actually know it exists and follow it under pressure, such as during a suspectable phishing attempt. Ownership also matters. Each policy should have a named owner, often a department head or a CISO's office. who is responsible for keeping the document accurate, scheduling its review, and answering questions about it. Without a named owner, policies tend to quietly go stale, referencing systems that have been retired or roles that no longer exist. Now we have the common challenges and pitfalls. Even well intentioned policy programs run into predictable problems. One is policy sprawl, writing so many overlapping or contradictory policies that employees cannot realistically track them all. Another is the opposite problem, a single extremely long document that nobody reads past the first page. Both extremes defeat the purpose, which is why the modular right sized approach favored by current ISO guidance tends to work best in practice. A second common pitfall is treating policy writing as one time project rather than ongoing program. Threats change, technology changes, and regulations change. A policy 3 years ago and never revisited is likely to be misaligned with how the organization actually operates today. This is why a fixed review cycle isn't just a formality. It's the mechanism that keeps the whole system credible. Finally, organizations sometimes underestimate the communication steps. Publishing a policy to a shared drive is not the same as communicating it. Effective program actively push policy awareness through onboarding, periodic refresher, and where appropriate, short quizzes or acknowledgement forms that create a record of who has seen and understood the material. So before we close, with rather to or before I close this topic, I'd like to propose a question to the class and think about an organization you've worked for. Uh, for instance, that you are working in a company, um, or even just interacted with a customer. Did you ever encounter a security policy directly? For example, a password requirement, or an acceptable use agreement, or a data handling notice? Was it clearly communicated, or did you find out about it only after problem occurred? We think this is a useful way to connect the theory we just covered to real um, live experience. So if you have realized it, kindly post your answers to the comment section. And in summary of my discussion or my topic, the security policies and procedures are the foundation in which every other control in an organization is built. A policy with a procedure is an intention without a method, and a procedure without a policy has no clear purpose. So, together, they turn security from an abstract goal into daily, accountable practice. And when maintained properly, they give the organization both a dispensable record and a genuine culture of security. Thank you, and we are happy to take questions. If you have any, kindly post it as well in the comment section. I will now forward the next discussion to our next presenter.
So let's proceed the second topic. which is the organizational security roles and responsibility. So, organizational security roles and responsibility. How organization assign ownership of security tasks across leadership, specialists, and everyday employees, so that security organizations not leave to chance. Building on our previous group's discussion of policies and procedures. This topic answered the natural flows up questions. Once the role exists, who is the actually responsible for writing them, enforcing them, and living by them? As the U.S. National Institute of Standard and Technology (NIST) puts it plainly in special publication 812, computer security is at the basic level that responsibility of everyone who can affect the security of a system. But specificities still need to assign clearly or nothing gets consistently done. A security program with no assigned owner tend to fail quickly. Everyone assumes someone else and handle. We will walk through the topic from the top of organization to the individual employees, and along the way we'll spend some extra time on the chief information security officers, since the role has become to the most visible face of organizational security in the decade. So the top of the chain senior management. So in NIST's view, 812 state that ultimate responsibility for an organization's security program rests with the senior management, who set goals, priorities, and resources, and who are expected to model good security behavior for the rest of organization. So this is an important point. Senior leadership to just approving a judge line NIST especially frame them and responsible for setting a good example because employees tend to mirror the security habits they see them modeled above them. So below senior leadership, many organizations designate computer security program manage to run day-to-day coordination across departments, someone who translates the board's priorities into the actual working program, and who serves as the point of contact between technical terms and organizational leadership. At the executive level, this coordinating function is increasingly held by a Chief Information Security Officer, or SISO. Industry sources describe the SISO as the executive who owns the organizational security strategies, budget, and risk posture, translating regulatory requirements into working security programs, and reporting cyber risks directly to the board of equivalent governing body in many mid-sized and larger organizations today. The ICSO sits alongside and the CIO and CTO as a per executive rather than reporting several layers below than which is reflect how central security has become the overall business risk. So the second is the closer look at the CISO role. Because of the CISO roles comes up in the warrant literature, it is worth spending a moment on what is the job actually involved. So industry guidance describe CISO responsibilities as being strategy, operations, governance, and communication on the strategy slides. CISOs define the organization's risk appetite, set security policy direction, and decide which framework. In ISO 27001 CI benchmark, the organizations will align so on the operational side of CISO. Responsibilities typically include building, leading, and security team, developing incident response and disaster recovery plans, managing security budgets, overseeing third-party and vendor risk, and educating the wider workforce on security awareness. When an incident does happen in CISO is often the person coordinating the technical response, communicating with affected stakeholders, and in the serious cases becoming the public of the organization during the after and branch. It is also worth noting that the CISO role is not static and commonality highlights that CISO increasing have and govern emerging risks such as an AI system. Adoption include native infrastructure that shadow IT, meaning the tool keep expanding as the technology landscape changes, even as its pure purpose, translating technical risk business discussions. So the third, specialist and operational roles. Need executive leadership set the specialists who implement security, day-to-day system administrator, who apply the technical control risk management staff, who study organizations-wide exposure that physical plant staff who secure the facilities that house system NIST guidance notes that system administrator must stay familiar with the security technology relevant to their own system and analyze technical vulnerabilities as part of their normal duties. Securities in this sense that back into their job description rather than treated as a separate task. Other specialist functions include risk and planning staff, who study organizations-wide exposure risk often on macro level rather than forming technical analysis of individual system and communicating or telecommunication staff who secure that the network that connect everything else. Each of these role has narrower scope that the CISO, but together then form the technical backbone that turn policy into the working defense. This worth nothing that this is the specialist rules are often the reality. As a password policy it is only effective as the system administrator who configures that authentication system to enforce written incident response procedure and only as effective that technical staff who actually execute during this aligned event. In smaller organizations, one person may hold several of these specialist functions at one while larger organizations typically split them into dedicated teams, each reporting and through the CISO office. So the fourth, shared and everybody responsibilities. Even with dedicated specialist security roles extend into department not traditionally sent and technical NIST SP 812 notes that personnel officers help determine the background check are needed to manage secure offboarding. For example, making sure that a departing employee system access is revoked promptly, which is close common and often overlooked security gap. General employee, meanwhile, remain responsible for following the policies and procedure that apply to their own work, reporting suspicious emails, safeguarding their own credentials, and implementing required security training. This layered structure, executive ownership specialists, implementations, HR support, and everyday employee compliance. And in what current CISO guidance call as security are cultured. A working environment where security is an embedded is the decision at every level, not treated as one department exclusive problem. It's worth emphasizing the role clarify cuts both ways, just as unclear ownership leads to gap. Overlapping ownership can lead to confusion and duplicated effort. As well-designed organization document not just that each role must do, but there are one role's responsibility and another begins, which is of captured and responsibility matrix alongside the policy document we discussed earlier. So the next sender is to Basta Kabahi.
Good day, everyone. I will discuss security standards and compliance, the external frameworks, laws, and certifications that define the minimum security bar organizations must meet, and the process of proving they meet it. Where the first two groups focus on internal documents and internal roles, this topic shifts the lens outward. Standards and compliance are largely about how an organization is judged by parties outside itself, regulators, auditors, customers, and business partners. A peer-reviewed study on security compliance describes it as adherence to legal, regulatory, and industry standards that govern data protection, privacy, and security measures, and notes that this compliance is a critical driver of an organization's overall cybersecurity posture, not just a paperwork exercise. We'll spend the next few minutes covering the major standards you're likely to encounter, why compliance matters beyond simply avoiding fines, and how organizations actually go about building a compliance program. Major standards organizations must know. Several standards recur across industries. ISO IEC 27001 is the leading international standard for building and certifying an information security management system, and it's the same standards that underpins much of the policy guidance our first group discussed. The policies they describe are in large part what an organization needs to have in place to pass an ISO 27001 audit. The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards or PSI DSS sets required security controls for any organizations handling cardholder data. Its current version 4.0.1 emphasizes continuous risk monitoring, targeted risk analysis, and multi-factor authentication, and applies even to small businesses that only occasionally process card payments. The General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, governs how organizations anywhere in the world must handle the personal data of European Union residents, meaning a company based entirely outside the EU can still be subject to GDPR if it serves EU customers. HIPAA, meanwhile, governs the protection of health information within the United States healthcare system and its business partners. Beyond these four, organizations frequently reference SOC2 and attestation report, especially common among sales and technology vendors. The CIS benchmarks 18 widely recognized best practices for security IT systems, and NIST SP 800-53, which is mandatory for U.S. federal agencies and their contractors but has become influential beyond government use because of its detailed control catalog. How difficult is compliance in practice? Research comparing these frameworks found that a 2022 study by the Payment Security Report indicated that only about 43% of organizations were fully PCI DSS compliant, while a separate industry study found that roughly 95% of companies subject to GDPR were only partially compliant or not compliant at all, figures that illustrate how difficult sustained compliance is in practice, even for well-resourced organizations. These numbers are useful reality check. Compliance is not a box you could check once and forget. It is an ongoing operational discipline, and most organizations, even large ones, are still working toward full alignment at any given time. Part of the difficulty is that most organizations must satisfy more than one standards simultaneously. A healthcare technology company that processes payments, for instance, may need to comply with HIPAA, PCI, DSS, and possibly GDPR at the same time, which, with its own audit cycle, documentation requirements, and terminology, which is why many organizations look for overlapping controls across frameworks rather than treating each one as a completely separate project. Another source of difficulty is simply the pace of change. Standards themselves are periodically revised. PCI DSS moved from version 3.2.1 to 4.0.1 with new requirements around monitoring and authentication, and GDPR enforcement guidance continues to evolve through new rulings and precedents. An organization that achieved compliance 2 years ago may find itself out of alignment today, not because its own practices slipped, but because the bar itself moved. This is part of why compliance teams describe their works as a continuous program rather than a project with a finish line. Why compliance matters beyond checking a box. The 2024 peer-reviewed study on security compliance found that its impact extends beyond simple regulatory adherence. Organizations that implement compliance frameworks improve their ability to mitigate threats, respond to incidents, and recover from breaches because compliance forces security measures to be consistent, documented, and aligned with recognized best practice. In other words, the process of becoming compliant tends to make an organization genuinely more secure, not just better at paperwork. The two goals reinforce each other. Non-compliance carries real financial consequences. Industry reporting notes that healthcare providers have faced fines exceeding $1 million for each IPAA violations tied to ransomware incidents alone, and that PCI DSS or GDPR violations can bring both regulatory penalties and loss of the ability to process customer payments altogether, which for many businesses is close to a worst-case operational outcome. Beyond direct fines, non-compliance can also mean losing contracts, since many enterprise customers now require proof of compliance, such as current SOC2 report or ISO 27001 certificate, before they will sign a vendor agreement. Building a compliance program. Practically, organizations typically start with a gap analysis, comparing existing controls such as data encryption, access management, and incident response against the requirements of the applicable standards, then remediating shortfalls before pursuing certification or attestation. This gap analysis is usually where an organizations discover that some of its existing and formal practices already satisfy part of the standard, while the other requirements need entirely new controls or documentation to be built from scratch. Because most organizations must satisfy more than one standard at once, current guidance stresses using overlapping standards like ISO 27001 and NIST together rather than treating each as a separate project. Many organizations build a single internal controls frameworks and then map it to each internal standards they need to satisfy, which avoid duplicating work every time a new regulation or customer requirement appears. Finally, compliance is not a one-time event. Even after certification is achieved, standards like ISO 27001 and PCI DSS require periodic reassessment and continuous monitoring, while the compliance program has to be staffed and funded on an ongoing basis, not treated as project with a defined end date. ISO IEC 27001 International Standard for Information Security Management System. PCI DSS required for any organizations processing card payments. GDPR governs personal data of EU residents, applies globally. HIPAA protects health information within US healthcare and its partners. SOC2 and CIS benchmark, widely used attestations and best practice checklist. The 2024 peer-reviewed studies noted compliance also fosters organizational accountability and a security-first culture across all levels. Given that full compliance is difficult even for large, well-funded organizations, how should a small business or startup prioritize with standard to pursue first if it can't do everything at once? Well, take a couple of answers before wrapping up. Um, in summary, security standards give organizations a shared external definition of secure enough, and compliance is the ongoing discipline of proving it. A discipline that research shows directly strengthens an organization's ability to prevent, withstand, and recover from cyber incidents. Standards and compliance are in many ways where the internal policies involves our earlier groups discussed get tested against an external and independently verified bar. This includes our report, and I will give the. We're going to listen the next topic our for Adnil Lumaras. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that detailed breakthrough on how compliance system works. And now that we have listened to basic security concepts and the roles of each person involved in cybersecurity in each organizations and the compliance management, we're going to discuss the governance and risk management. A 2025 study on the role of IT governance in organizational cybersecurity describes governance as the set of policies, structures, and controls that aligns IT strategies with business objectives, the framework that decides how security decisions get made, not just what those decisions are. We'll walk through what governance means in practice, what risk management adds to the picture, the major frameworks organizations use, and why the two concepts function best as a single connected discipline. So first and foremost, what governance means in security. Governance answers questions like who approves security investments, who is accountable to the board, and how are competing priorities resolved when, say, the engineering team wants to ship a new feature quickly and the security team wants more time to test it. COBIT, Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies, developed by ISACA, is one of the most widely referenced governance frameworks built to align IT operations with business goals while managing risk and ensuring compliance across the enterprise. COBIT was originally developed in 1996 to help financial auditors manage growing IT environments, and it has evolved considerably since then, most notably with COBIT 2019, which organizes governance around six core principles intended to ensure that IT efforts creates value, manage risk effectively, and stays flexible as business needs evolve. Current guidance distinguish COBIT from adjacent frameworks. COBIT governs the full IT landscape, including risk and process design. ITIL focuses specifically on IT service management. In practice, organizations combine several of these frameworks rather than relying on just one, since each covers a different, complementary slice of the same underlying problem. So, what risk management adds? Risk management is the operational engine inside governance, identifying assets and threats, assessing likelihood and impact, then choosing whether to mitigate, transfer, accept, or avoid each risk. Mitigation means reducing a risk likelihood or impact through controls. Transfer typically means shifting financial exposure through insurance or contractual terms. Acceptance means consciously deciding a risk is tolerable given its cost versus its likelihood. And avoidance means eliminating the activity that creates the risk altogether. The 2025 study on IT governance found that effective governance practices, including risk management, compliance enforcement, and stakeholder accountability, direct contribute to a more secure IT environment, and identified COBIT or ISO 27001 and NIST as a key frameworks organizations draw on this purpose. This connects directly back to our third group's presentation. The standards they discuss are in large part the tools, governance, and risk management used to decide what's good enough security actually looks for a given organization. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, updated in February 2024, added a new governance function specifically to formalize this connection, requiring organizations to establish oversight committees, define a risk management strategy, and clarify roles and responsibilities as a foundation before technical controls are even applied. This is notable shift from earlier versions of the framework, which focus primarily on the technical functions of identifying, protecting, detecting, responding to, and recovering from threats without giving governance its own dedicated category. To make this concrete, consider how a mid-sized company might handle a decision about adopting a new cloud-based AI tool. Under a mature governance structure, that decision wouldn't be made unilaterally by whichever department wants a tool. Instead, it would go through a defined process. The risk management team would assess what data the tool touches and what could go wrong. The compliance team would check whether the tool creates any regulatory exposure, and a governance committee, often chaired by or reporting to the CISO, would weigh the business benefit against the assessed risk before approving, rejecting, or conditionally approving the tool's use. Recent comparative research on frameworks such as COBIT, ISO 27001, ISO 42001, and NIST CFC 2.0 specifically examine how well these frameworks currently handle exactly this kind of decision around emerging technologies like large language models, and found that while each framework offers useful structure, all of them would benefit from stronger, more explicit guidance for managing the risks that new AI system introduce. A reminder that governance frameworks themselves are living documents that must keep evolving the technology they're meant to inverse. Without governance, risk management becomes inconsistent. Different teams assessing and creating similar risks in different uncoordinated ways with no single accountable decision maker. Without risk management, governance becomes abstract. Policies with no evidence connecting them to the organization's actual threat landscape, essentially rules written in a vacuum. A 2024 peer-reviewed comparative study of major governance, risk, and compliance frameworks, including COBIT, ISO 27001, and the NIST CSF, found that organizations increasingly need these frameworks to evolve together to keep pace with the new technology risks, such as those introduced by artificial intelligence systems. The 2025 IT governance study similarly concluded that a well-structured governance framework is necessary to foster a proactive, resilient cybersecurity posture, underscoring governance and risk management as the layer that ties policies, roles, and compliance standards into one coherent, board accountable program. This is the thread that connects everything our topic is covered today. Policies exist because governance decided that they were necessary. Roles exist because governance assigned accountability. And standard exists because governance choose which external board or organization will be measured against. Risk management is an ongoing process that keep all of those decisions grounded on the organization's actual current threat landscape rather than becoming static or outdated. Governance defines who decides and who is accountable. Risk management identifies, assesses, and treats specific threats through mitigation, transfer, acceptance, or avoidance. COBIT, ISO 2701, and the NIST CSF are the most cited governance risk frameworks in current research. NIST CSF 2.0 new govern function added in 2024 formally links governance and risk management together. Emerging technology risks such as AI adoptions are pushing these frameworks to keep on evolving. To close, governance and risk management form the top layer that connects everything our group has presented today. Policies, rules, and compliance standards all exist to serve a governance structure that keeps risk visible, owned, and under continuous management. One of the four topics we covered today function well in isolation. Together, they form one continuous self-reinforcement security program. Now, before I'll end this discussion, I would like to ask one simple question regarding governance. Thinking back across all four topics presented today, which layer, policies, roles, standards, or governance do you think is hardest for a real organization to get right, and why? Now, if you have an answer to this, feel free to drop it in the comment section, or you could shoot us an email that we will be providing on the description of this video. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email, a message, or comment to the YouTube video. Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your time.